Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. My name is Felix Shipkevich, and I am honored to co-host today's webinar titled The Overview of the New FTC Rule Targeting Fake and AI-Generated Reviews with my colleague, Yvonne Bowser-Caballero. First and foremost, I want to just mention that today's September 11th, which obviously is a very somber and sad day in our country. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in New York City, and I was in New York City on September 11th. In fact, my first day of working at Division of Enforcement at New York Stock Exchange was supposed to be my legal externship when I was in law school. Was supposed to be on September 11th at 2 World Trade Center. I find today is always a day that I hold very dear and close to my heart to remember those of you who were killed. And Yvonne is based in DC, so we wanted to start today's webinar with just obviously with remembering this very important day in American history. Just a little quick, I need to unmute. Oh, Yvonne, did I unmute you?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. All right. We had a little technical difficulty before starting, so apologies. All right. We have a very interesting subject to discuss today. Before we go right into it, also, it's a rule that has been finalized by the Federal Trade Commission last month. We're actually coming around to a 1-month anniversary. This final rule has not gotten as much attention as, for instance, some other federal rules typically get in the consumer finance or generally consumer related regulatory field, which was kind of a surprise. And I always try to come up with what kind of a number on a scale 1 to 10. I would say this was a 3 or 4 out of 10. I would have expected a rule of this magnitude to get a little bit more attention in the legal and regulatory community. It got significant press coverage by mainstream media, but not so much in the legal community. I mean, there were articles written, we published an article, but not as much as you typically would get when the Federal Trade Commission or the CFPB or the SEC or the CFTC or FinCEN, any federal agency would publish a final rule. So when Yvonne and I were discussing what would be an interesting subject to discuss, we thought this would be one that definitely deserves a little bit more coverage, and we'll explain why. So hopefully you'll enjoy this presentation. I'll be very quick and short about myself. I'm a practicing regulatory attorney. My firm has been around since 2011. Before that, I was a general counsel of a CFTC registered futures commission merchant. We do work in commodities, futures, derivatives, payments, consumer finance field. We do work for debt relief companies. We represent clients before federal and state agencies, the SEC, CFTC, DOJ, the CFPB. We've worked with SROs like FINRA and the NFA. I teach part-time at Hofstra Law School. And last year, I published a casebook titled Digital Coins and Cryptocurrencies, Law and Regulation, which was something that took 5 years to work on. I'm very proud of it. And that's it about me. Yvonne.
All right, everyone. My name is Yvonne Bowser-Caballero, and I have been with Shipkevich for almost 4 years now as a regulatory counsel, primarily focusing on transactional services in the consumer, financial, and payment spaces. If you have done any licensing work with us before, you're probably familiar with me. I do a lot of the licensing and registration guidance with clients and have experience with both the NMLS and state licensing systems. And, I'm here today to kind of explain more of the compliance regulatory side of things. So.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Mhm.
A little plug about our firm's upcoming fifth annual workshop. This workshop is for those in the debt relief space. This will be on January 30th, 31st. More details to coming every year, except unfortunately 2020. We've held a workshop on the West Coast in Orange County, where our entire firm provides it's really a full day of educational events, also followed by also networking and getting to meet both industry market participants and regulators that come to our events. We were very blessed and honored to have Bryce McNitt from the CFPB speak at our event 2 years in a row. We've had state regulators who spoke at our events, and also it's really a very good and educational and also like to believe fun event to attend. More details to follow if you subscribe to our email list. You'll receive updates. But if you're interested, we hope to see you at our event. We typically have these at the end of our presentation, but this time we decided to kind of change it up a little bit. We have two websites. I've been around actually for many years, and this Yvonne and I were preparing this presentation. Decided, look, let's switch it up. So Debt Relief Watch, you can actually go to debtreliefwatch.com. You don't need to go to debtreliefwatch.shipkevich.com, but if you want to, you could go to this or debtreliefwatch.com. It'll just redirect you to our firm's subdomain. That's for anything consumer finance, regulatory related. It doesn't necessarily, it's not just that settlement, it's that relief, credit counseling, anything lending, consumer lend related regulatory work that we handle, and news information. And then money transmittal law. Money transmittal law has been around since 2011, since I founded the firm. We do a lot of work in the payments and money transmission space, and obviously also virtual currency space. So that's a website that has a pretty good library of information, and as well as news alerts if you'd like to keep abreast of what's happening in the payments and money transmission space. And also, all of our articles are also published on JD Supra. So that's kind of a mainstream pop for all of that. Anyway, let's get to the today's webinar. So we'll talk about the FTC rule. We'll always say who, when, what, right? Who the rule will affect, when the rule goes into effect, what the rule covers, right? What basically is considered to be a review or testimonial, right? What the new requirements are and prohibitions under the rule, and who will be the FTC will be able to sue under the rule, and what the penalties will be, right? And finally, we're going to wrap it all up and talk about preparing to implement proper compliance under this rule and overall just implications, and we'll provide our final thoughts. Now, a little background. The rule, as I said a few minutes ago, is in its infancy stages. I mean, it was adopted on August 14th, and it's targeting unfair and deceptive acts and practices involving consumer reviews and testimonials. In and it's a very important rule. So let me kind of put a pin in the slides. I know we have a lot of we'll have a lot of wording on the slides, and sometimes I follow the slides. Sometimes I want to provide my commentary. I'm personally guilty when I purchase products and services online, including an avid shopper with my family on Amazon, that prior to purchasing a product on websites like Amazon, I often just look at reviews or number of stars before I even look at the product description. And I think for those of you who are listening, you're probably thinking that the number of stars or number of reviews when you're booking on whether Airbnb or you're purchasing anything on Amazon is probably the very first thing that comes into your mind before you're even looking to purchase a product, right? Before you're thinking description. It's unbelievable that reviews have such a great effect on the products and services that we as consumers purchase today. And so um, the rule today, right, it will play a very important role of how to either prohibit or stop certain bad actors from manipulating it. And particularly in the age where we have artificial intelligence um, penetrating our daily lives on such a great extent, and these AI driven reviews can be adopted by companies. And when I say companies, I probably should put an asterisk by bad companies or bad operators, or those hired by bad operators in order to generate more and more fake reviews so that someone could purchase greater services or greater goods. Well, we need to somehow control that, right? I think I watched recently on I don't remember if it was CNN or Fox, but I think it was Fox Business where there was a study done, and please don't quote me, that over 70% of Amazon product reviews are arguably fake, and it's very difficult to distinguish whether or not those reviews for a consumer to distinguish whether those reviews are real or not. Um, so clearly, the regulators, the Federal Trade Commission, with its powers um, to try to implement this rule, is going to try to prevent these bad operators from you know creating more reviews, and particularly using artificial intelligence in persuading consumers purchasing any goods and services that could potentially be misleading. All of this arose out of a 2021 case from the Supreme Court case, AMG Capital Management versus FTC, where the Supreme Court said that UDAP is a federal statute, Fair Deceptive Practices Act, where the Supreme Court said that that statutory federal framework alone is not enough for the federal agency to basically have penalties in place, and it needs to have its rule in place. And therefore, it took several years, but ultimately did, through obviously the proposal, the commentaries, the selected, adopted this rule. And so today it's more important than ever to have this rule in place and to actually assess and evaluate how this rule will ultimately be implemented and enforced, right? And that's something we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation. Now, I don't necessarily always agree on the personal level with Chair Lena Khan, um, but I agree with this statement. Fake reviews not only waste people's time and money, but also populate the marketplace and divert businesses away from honest competitors. By strengthening the FTC's toolkit to fight deceptive advertising, the final rule will protect Americans from getting cheated, to put businesses that unlawfully game the system on notice, and promote markets that are fair, honest, and competitive. I think that's a pretty solid and straightforward statement, right? The ultimate question is going to be to what extent this rule, and to what extent the Federal Trade Commission will actually implement this rule in order to prevent Americans from being cheated. Now, the final rule is set to elevate transparency and authenticity for consumer reviews by, among other things, prohibiting unfair and deceptive acts practicing involving the following. So first of all, fake and false consumer reviews, testimonial, and celebrity testimonials. Okay, so very important. Fake reviews, consumer testimonials, and celebrity testimonials. And I will actually provide definitions of what consumer and celebrity testimonials are. It also does not allow you to buy positive or negative reviews. Okay. Some of you are questioning, why would you ever buy negative reviews? Well, if you wanted to hurt someone, if you wanted to create damage to your competitor, you'd be buying negative reviews. Clearly, you should be buying positive reviews. You shouldn't have any insider reviews and consumer testimonials, right? Anything inside within your company, anything like your own direct relatives. We'll touch upon that really shortly. Company controlled websites, right? Anything that's controlled by your own company. Review suppression, that's a big one. That's actually interesting. I was in preparation for this, Yvonne and I watched a video of one of these tech YouTubers who actually talked about the Federal Trade Commission rule, and he regularly talks how he has bona fide reviews of certain products, which he doesn't get paid. He actually gets paid by YouTube for the views that he generates, and he generates millions of views. But when he reviews something that he either purchases directly out of his own pocket or company would send something to him for free and doesn't even ask him to review, but the review is not positive, the company would then suppress the review, right? The company would then suppress the review, and that negative review disappears. So this rule specifically focuses on the suppression of these type of reviews and will, intends to stop them. And finally, misuse of fake social media indicators, and obviously that by itself is just a world of its own with social media platform. Well, we're not talking about the platforms, but the reviews through the platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. So people who actually use their own, not the platforms themselves. That's just a very different. That's a different ballgame. That's different. There's immunity to that. There's a Supreme Court case. We're not talking about the platforms themselves, but the people who use social media platforms, right? The people who actually use them for their own gains. Those people could be held accountable, right? So, who does the new rule affect? Well, look, that's pretty broad, right? It affects pretty much anyone who is looking to write fake reviews, right? If you're looking to, if you're a business, if you're looking to, I mean, my goodness, you could go on Google and you could literally just type in buy Google reviews or buy Yelp reviews, and you'll be taken to a bunch of websites where most of these people, I'd arguably say that 90 plus, if not 99% of these people located outside of the US will write these fake reviews. And now you have bots writing these reviews. So I'm sure that companies who run these bots will now be held accountable under the law. Intermediaries to procure them, right? So if you run a website that sells the ability for someone to purchase these reviews, well, guess what? Now you're subject to this new rule. Well, when it goes into effect, which will be October 21st. So that's just around the corner. So believe it or not, before you blink of the eye, before the election day, this rule will go into effect, right? So that's going into really quick. Now, what is defined as a consumer review or consumer testimonial, right? Under the final rule. So I'm going to read this, right, directly from the rule. That's the definition. So a consumer review means a consumer's evaluation or a purported consumer's evaluation of a product, service, or business that's submitted by the consumer or purported consumer that's published to a website or platform dedicated in whole and part to receiving and displaying such evaluations. For the purposes of this part, consumer reviews include consumer ratings, regardless whether they include any text or narrative. Now, the reason I actually emphasized here consumer ratings is because the definition of a consumer review or evaluation is not just what you would consider to be a review, just, you review something, but the review actually includes the ratings, meaning that if you decide to give somebody, a fake or AI generated 5-star review, or you decide to hurt someone and give somebody a 1-star rating, right? Just by giving somebody a 1-star review, that falls under the definition of a consumer evaluation or consumer review. That's it. You're just within the 4 corners of that definition. So it doesn't mean that you have to provide a narrative. You could just literally just provide those stars. As you know, I'm using Google as an example. You could just, use those stars. You don't need to provide just a narrative. Now, a consumer testimonial, right, is an advertising or promotional message, including verbatim, verbal statements, demonstrations, or depictions of the name, signature, likeness, or other identifying personal characteristics of an individual. The consumers are likely to believe, reflect the opinions, belief, or experiences of a consumer who has purchased, used, or otherwise had experience with a product. Okay, so the statute clearly defines consumer review and consumer testimonial. And finally, this definition of a celebrity testimonial. I think this is going to be very interesting, and I'll tell you why this is going to be interesting, particularly because there's significant amount of regulatory and legal precedent as a result of celebrity advertising and testimony following the rise of cryptocurrencies. And I'm going to use that as an example. Obviously, we see celebrities' testimonials everywhere. I mean, we see advertisement, but we know there's advertisement, right? They'll say, you know, um, celebrities get paid to advertise products and services, right? The question really becomes whether the celebrity testimonial is something that will actually be used only for the paid purposes. Is it going to deceive someone if the person hasn't actually used it? So there's a definition here. It means an advertising a promotional message, including verbal statements, demonstration, or depictions of the name, signature, likeness, or other identifying personal characteristics that consumers are likely to believe reflects the opinions or beliefs or experiences of well-known individuals who purchased or used or otherwise experience with the products or services. Meaning that if you're a celebrity and you're getting paid to endorse something and you never used it, you either have to say it's a paid advertisement, that's perfectly fine. You have to disclose that. But if you don't disclose it, if you've never used it, you potentially could get sued. And that was very, very clear as a result of a number of enforcement actions taken by the Securities and Exchange Commission against many celebrities who have depicted various coins. So it's just as an example in the cryptocurrency initial coin offering boom in the late 2010s. So that's just kind of the example. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne, who's going to talk about the key provisions of the final rule.
Hi, everyone. So I am going to get into the nitty-gritty of what exactly is prohibited under these new sections of the rule. So first, we're going to touch on the fake or false consumer reviews, testimonials, or celebrity testimonials. So businesses are prohibited from writing, creating, selling, purchasing, or disseminating consumer reviews, testimonials, or celebrity testimonials that materially misrepresent any of the following: the existence of the reviewer. So speaking a little bit more on what Felix said, looking at these AI generated reviews, whether the reviewer actually used or had experience with the product, service, or business being reviewed, or the nature of the reviewer's experience with the product, service, or business. So notably, something to make a just a little star of is that, you aren't expected to be monitoring general solicitations sent to large groups of customers where it wouldn't be reasonable to expect a business to know whether such resulting reviews or testimonials were fake or false. So, just harping just on that, expectation of whether they should have known or did know that, these reviews are actually false or fake. And then next slide, please, Felix. All right, and then moving on to buying positive or negative consumer reviews. So businesses are prohibited from providing compensation or other incentives in exchange for or conditioned on, either expressly or by implication, the writing or creation of consumer reviews that express a particular sentiment about a product, service, or business. So this means that you cannot request whether it is positive or negative, or you specifically want a reviewer to harp on one aspect of your product or service. You cannot buy these types of reviews from or you cannot buy or incentivize these types of reviews with consumers. So really, they're trying to prohibit paid or incentivized reviews when the business soliciting the review provides compensation or an incentive in exchange for the review. So say, for example, a business offers a customer $5 off a future purchase in exchange for a product review. That's not inherently unlawful. But if you only offer $5 off in exchange for a 5-star review, or in exchange for a positive review, then this would be in violation of the new rule.
And I think that's an important distinction, right? there's no per se prohibition to offer somebody some kind of consideration to say, please review us as long as it's an honest review, right? As long as it's an honest review, right? So if we wanted to send everybody who's listening to this webinar, whether live recording or just live or recording, and say, hey, we'll send you a $5 gift card for reviewing us. As long as it's an honest review, there's no problem with it. As an example, we're not going to do that. Don't get too excited, okay? But if business is going to say, hey, you just you purchased a service or you purchased a product and we see you're very happy. Hey, do you mind giving us a nice review in return for this? You can no longer do that, right? The question really what boils down to, right? And this is kind of, again, when Yvonne and I prepare for these, we always have these discussions, and these are going to be the discussions that we'll have with our clients. Is there's a little bit of cynicism to this, at least from my end, right? For those of you who hear, our in person or webinar presentation, I like to bring a little bit of sarcasm and cynicism to our educational materials, because the question is, well, how are you going to enforce this, right? Because let's assume you have a customer complaint, and it's obviously very easy for someone to file a complaint and say, hey, I was incentivized. Somebody gave me a $5 gift card in return for positive review. I mean, is the Federal Trade Commission going to start taking actions? Probably not, right? I mean, they don't have the resources to take. Okay. So let's say they get like 100 of these against the business. Are they going to start taking it? I don't know. Like, does the Federal Trade Commission have a big enough enforcement staff to start prosecuting all these cases? Which is, by the way, probably I'm going to mention throughout this, right? It's a great rule, and it intends to solve a very big problem, right? Because, like I said in the very beginning of this presentation, I am that sucker that before buying anything on Amazon, before I think I was like the other day, I was looking for a new fan to buy for my office here because it's a little stuffy, and I was like, before I even look at any brand, I look at the stars, right? But then the question is, what is going to be the enforceability? Because the Federal Trade Commission, this is a rule, this is an FTC rule, and only they can enforce it. So the question is this something going to spill over to the states, right? Are the states going to start adopting a similar rule? That's going to be interesting, right? But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether they're going to go for the low-hanging fruit and go for the big companies, or are they going to try to actually make an example of a smaller players? Anyway, let's go to the next slide.
Absolutely. So next, they touch on insider consumer reviews and consumer testimonials. So an officer or manager of a business is prohibited from writing or creating a consumer review or testimonial about its business without clearly and conspicuously disclosing their material relationship to the business, unless in the case of the consumer testimonial, the relationship is otherwise clear to the audience. So this is going to be big for anyone who uses these types of testimonials in their advertising for services, and specifically with respect to consumer testimonials, businesses are prohibited from disseminating or causing the dissemination of consumer testimonials by officers, managers, employees, or agents without appropriate disclosures, unless the testimonialist relationship to the business is otherwise clear to the audience. So this is something that, in the comments, we actually see there was a mention as to, a company where a CEO sent out an email, to all of his employees, requesting that they put a consumer or put a review, regarding the company on their website. So this is something that, will be interesting to see how exactly the FTC is going to be enforcing this provision of the rule.
Also, many startups, obviously in any field, and I, obviously not to defend these startups, but I could see a startup kind of playing the devil's advocate will say, hey, we're about to launch this new software, right? And you worked really hard, so why don't you go tell all why don't we try to get as many reviews as possible so that consumers start purchasing it. Yeah, it's almost like it almost comes down to like, like thinking of like these insider trading laws that you have on the security side. So now you have these insider consumer reviews, and now you have these prohibition insider reviews. And so clearly at some point there's going to be a CID or some kind of an inquiry, and there's going to be discovery of who sent that email and who got the email and how many of these were dispersed and who actually implemented it. Um, this is going to be fascinating to see, because then the question is, so which companies are going to be targeted, right? Because also the question on these insider reviews is, what is going to be the FTC's investigations team's decision making, which industry to go after, right? That's going to be my question, right? Well, which industry is it going to be? The software industry, the pharma industry, I don't know, the consumer lending industry? That is kind of like what I would love to ask to someone. How do you pick which industry, which company? Because if you're going to be sending a message on these insider consumer reviews, for especially for startups, I imagine a lot of these are going to be for startups. That's my guess. Not going to be for established companies. CEOs or boards are not going to be like, hey, go send reviews for our products for established company. Tim Cook is not going to send, hey, we have the new iPhone 16. Let's go send everybody. No, I'm not going to do that, right? No one's going to, Jeff Bezos is not going to do that. So it's going to be the newer companies. So I'm interested to see what's the reasoning, the logic behind, how do they select the industry and the companies? And because that obviously is going to create that domino effect of, what the next kind of company would fall, or what the next. That's just kind of interesting thing process of from the enforcement side.
Yep. And it is important to note that along with officers and managers falling under this prohibition, their immediate relatives also fall under this prohibition. So, unless it is properly disclosed that, the individual providing the review is an immediate relative of an officer or manager of that business, that will also be prohibited. So, it's like Felix said, it's just going to be really interesting to see, how the FTC decides to tackle this and where it decides to focus its sites at first.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to company-controlled review websites or entities. This one's pretty simple. Businesses are prohibited from materially misrepresenting that a review website, organization, or entity that it controls, owns, or operates as independent in nature when it is in fact controlled, owned, or operated by the business and features products or services of the business. So, a business that sells farming equipment cannot, also own a farming equipment website, where it strategically places its own products and services and features its own products and services, and, perhaps negatively reviews or puts negative sites on another service without properly disclosing that.
By the way, before you move to the review suppression,
Mhm.
so these type of review websites, we see them. They exist quite significantly in the consumer finance field. I'm not going to go into the specifics here, but um, the I mean, it's obviously not a secret that in different areas of consumer services, whatever they are, right? There are review websites that are set up by the very companies, and then they claim that they, there are all these other review sites, and somehow miraculously, the review site lists them as the number one company, right? And then all of their competitors as, secondary in nature or review, or has bad reviews. So what's also going to be kind of interesting to see is, it's great that these company controlled websites, these review sites, are now on the regulators' radar. The question really comes down to is also, well, which industries? Because I mean, I could tell you that these review websites exist in mortgage, automotive, boats, real estate. I mean, I mean, my goodness, they exist in so many of them, where you got these review websites, and sometimes it's not even the company that owns them, it's somebody else, a friend of a friend. So how do you tie them all together? Anyway, that's going to be a very interesting one. That's going to be hard to prove unless you have a direct link, a direct connection. But that's become a very big marketing effort, as a review, right? But anyway, let's move on to the next one.
Yep. All right, next is review suppression, which Felix briefly touched on. Businesses are going to be prohibited from attempting to suppress negative or unfavorable reviews, except in limited circumstances. So these limited circumstances will be when the review contains a trade secret, confidential information, personal information, if it's defamatory, abusive, vulgar, etc. Or if it is clearly false or misleading, or when the business reasonably believes that the review is fake or wholly unrelated to the products or services being offered. So, there are a lot of circumstances where you will be allowed to suppress, truly, false or, abusive or harassive reviews. But you will be prohibited from attempting to suppress reviews. And like Felix mentioned in this video that we were watching, there are sites that will allow companies to specifically remove the text of negative reviews from their websites. So you may be able to see the overall star rating, but you can't see whichever rating actually gave a negative review. So it'll be interesting to see how the FTC decides to combat review suppression, and how it's going to be bolstering its claims as to review suppression, and seeing that these third party companies in particular that allow these companies to suppress reviews, how they will be affected as well.
I foresee that this 465.7 review suppression is arguably is going to be uh, uh, litigated. And I'll tell you why I think that there will be there could be some constitutional questions raised in this one. Um, I'm not going to go into the specifics now, but I imagine that most people who have a business feel sometimes vindicated if somebody left them a negative review that was malicious, that was fake. Um, it just happens all the time, right? And I'm just thinking even from my own experience, right? I've been teaching. I'm in my 8th year teaching Hofstra law, and about 2 years ago, I had a student who Yvonne knows. Every Tuesday when he came to class, he would sit in the first row, and he would write um, a really nasty review. Would it be defamatory, harassing, or abusive? I don't know, right? So the question is, would that be considered to be? But it was definitely not very pleasant. He didn't call me any names, but he wrote a review, and he made it a point every week to write a review on Rate My Professor. And then I contacted Rate My Professor, and then every week I would say, I found that within their own policies, that he violated their own policy, and they removed it because he violated their own policy, right? So the question is, right, even though let's assume it wasn't defamatory harassing, is it abusive? Probably. I could have argued that he's abusing it every week, but it was probably his right to do that. Is it obscene, vulgar, sexually explicit? No. Discriminatory? No. False and misleading? Yeah, it was false and misleading, but anyway, that's his right. But the thing is, they had their policies and they removed it. So the question would I be guilty of review of suppression of a review, right, by student who was doing it on purpose, but it was his choice to do it on purpose. I think this is going to be one that's going to be litigated, and there are a lot of businesses, from doctors to lawyers to accountants to banks who get reviewed for services they never provided, and then I know that there are cases where doctors end up suing their patients for leaving really derogatory reviews for services they never provided, and then they actually been successful. There've been another, cases go back to even 10 years ago, 10 years to 2014, 2013 in New York. There've been doctors who decided to sue patients for leaving Yelp reviews and been actually successfully for suing under libel and slander. So I think this is going to be very interesting to see, because the review suppression part has a lot of, I think the core of it is important, right? You don't want to suppress legitimate, bona fide reviews, but then where do you draw the line? How do you then know what exactly is a fault? What would you consider defamatory, harassing versus what's a bona fide review? I think that's going to be very fact specific. So.
Now, something I will make note of is that additionally, this provision prohibits businesses from misrepresenting that select consumer reviews represent most or all reviews. And now this is something that I have seen personally on, certain, service websites where, they'll display all of their favorable reviews, but if, you click on see all reviews, maybe you'll find, some negative reviews. So this is interesting to know as a little caveat in this same review suppression section that they are also going to be looking at whether your representation of your reviews is deceptive or not. Now, finally, section 465.8 looks at the misuse of fake indicators on social media influence. So this broadly prohibits the sale, distribution, or purchase of fake indicators of social media influence. So think followers, friends, connections, subscribers, views, plays, likes, shares, reposts, comments, where the person knew or should have known the indicator to be fake, and the indicator can be used by individuals or businesses to materially misrepresent their influence or importance for a commercial purpose. So who is allowed to bring suit under this new rule? So as a trade regulation rule, the FTC is entitled to bring suit for violations of the new rule. But as Felix mentioned, it's going to be interesting to see, whether this expands among state regulators. And it's also going to be interesting to see, whether or not other agencies like the CFPB will work in tandem with the FTCs when conducting, their own investigations for the FTC to bring suit for these types of violations. So even though, as of now, the FTC is the only entity that can bring suit, this is something to just keep an eye on and see how this may expand across, other states and agencies as well. Can you go back to the previous slide really quick?
Oh, sure.
Yep. And then finally, what are the penalties for violations? So the FTC Act provides that violators of a trade regulation rule with actual knowledge or knowledge fairly implied on the basis of objective circumstances that such act is unfair or deceptive and is prohibited by such rule are liable for civil penalties for each violation. And the current maximum civil penalty is just over $50,000 per violation. Obviously, administrative courts will take account statutory factors and may impose lower per violation penalties. But this is big. This is huge, and this is something that we saw FTC Chair Lena Khan make a note of, that they now have a civil penalty in their toolkit to use for these violations. And I expect them to come after companies, maybe not for a full 50,000 per violation, but for large amounts.
And correct me if I'm wrong. The FTC can use the administrative courts in order to prosecute these cases, correct?
Yes, correct. So these cases will be prosecuted in administrative courts, correct?
Right. Which from just a purely enforcement point of view, that creates sort of a fast track for those of you who are not lawyers. If you are, if you're looking to prosecute, you can go to federal courts for federal issues, but you could also go to administrative courts, and that really creates a very fast track in order to try to get to a hearing or to force someone into a settlement. So I imagine also the line of thinking going back to, well, the questions, which cases, which industries the FTC is going to pick. It's going to be an interesting to see what's the line of thinking, the investigative process, and how quickly they're going to want to try to get to potentially settle a few cases in order to create some kind of precedent per violation. Because because eventually, again, speaking from experience, most defendants are going to say, look, we'll just settle, and that creates a legal precedent for, hey, if you'd like to settle here are a few cases that's recently settled, and that creates that statutory, um well, I'm sorry, scratch that, that create that precedent for more cases to settle. So that's sort of the what I call is always the quick and easy backdoor to getting companies to pay out. So
Now, through this rule, the FTC will also be able to seek consumer redress. For any consumers that are injured due to the rule violation. So that is another thing. On top of, the civil penalties, you may be on the hook for any sort of injury, whether that's monetary or otherwise, for consumers. All right, preparing for compliance, our most exciting topic, what to do next. So you know about the rule. Now, how do you prepare? Companies are advised to look at their current review management strategies, audit your strategies, and implement compliance measures to meet these standards. Update your procedures for collecting and displaying reviews to ensure authenticity and transparency. Train your marketing and compliancing teams on the nuances of this rule. Have them listen to our webinar so that they can avoid inadvertent violations. Establish clear policies for disclosing material connections with any endorsements or testimonials. Just make it clear that, your company has policies in place to combat these violations.
yeah, and in reality is I think that many big companies, the Fortune 500 companies, and not just Fortune 500, but generally large institutions right now, their compliance departments are looking to modify and tweak and train their, compliance procedures and compliance personnel and their marketing sales team in order to collect reviews in accordance with this rule, and they're looking at their emails that are going out, whether they're internal emails or whether they outsource the collection of reviews to third parties. Um, if you are outsourcing the reviews to third parties, I strongly urge for you to make sure that they're familiar with this, because I don't want to sound skeptical, but I'm going to be a little facetious when I tell you that probably the smaller companies that collect reviews may not be as familiar with this rule going into effect, right? And particularly if you're working with an overseas company and those specifically using AI to generate reviews, or how you have been using AI to generate reviews for whatever, probably not such ethically right way to collect reviews, you might want to think about it again. Um, Now, your question, and it probably is, if I'm U.S. based and I'm using a company that's based overseas to collect these reviews, if the company that I'm outsourcing to is not in the U.S., well, I could tell you from experience, you are the low-hanging fruit, and they're going to go after you, right? They don't have jurisdiction over you because ultimately the reviews are collected on your behalf. Now, let's kind of flip a little bit. Let's say you're a company that is selling products and you're based outside of the US. And you say to yourself, I don't care because I have my products or services shipped to the US. But ultimately, you have ties, you have that link to US consumers. The US government has jurisdiction over you. I'm not going to get into the specific of personal jurisdiction, but they do have jurisdiction over you. And having spent many years working in the commodities and futures field, I can tell you that the CFTC is never afraid to prosecute non-US companies who are doing business with US consumers are U.S. individuals or U.S. companies. So I'm kind of curious to see whether the Federal Trade Commission is only going to try to use its, jurisdictional powers over what's within the borders of the United States of America, or whether it's actually going to try to reach and grab those reviews, the fake reviews that are generated by companies outside of the US, because we probably could make the following statements that like I said in the beginning, that the overwhelming majority of reviews are made outside of the US. And I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately the decision is to made to prosecute a company that's outside of the US. And so, look, don't assume don't assume that that won't be the case, because regardless of who you think the president of the United States will be, I do think that the U.S. government likes to use its personal jurisdiction available to for prosecuted companies and bring them to U.S. courts. But let's talk about overall implications, Yvonne.
All right. So, while both Felix and I agree, and many others agree that, this is a necessary move by the FTC, it begs the question of how exactly the FTC will discern between what a fake review and a real review is, especially with the use of artificial intelligence permeating more and more in our own individual lives. I can now ask AI, to generate a review for a product for me on my behalf. And how is the FTC going to discern whether or not, my review is real because of my own experience, or whether, that was a review that AI was asked to make falsely on behalf of a false individual? Um, According to the FTC, as is the answer with most legal questions, it will depend based upon the specific facts. Um, it is possible that a business may possess clear indications that purchase reviews are likely to be fake or false, in which case a failure to investigate further may trigger liability. For example, if a business hires a third party to provide free samples of its products to consumers to generate reviews without more, there may be no reason to investigate the resulting reviews. However, you may be on notice that, resulting reviews are likely to be investigated as fake or false if those reviews are submitted too quickly, or, you have a large amount submitted over a very short period of time, or if those reviews refer to the wrong product, if they have grammar, spelling errors. These are all things that we expect the FTC to look at when doing their investigations.
I think these are very good final thoughts and overall implications. I think we covered quite a lot, and we're going to see how this rule is going to be enforced. I think it's a great rule in its spirit. I think it obviously is looking to accomplish quite a lot, and hopefully um, it will. I'm curious to see how it will be challenged in courts. I am very interested to see how the review suppression part of it is going to be eventually withstand the challenge in courts, and ultimately whether the states are going to end up adopting something similar, because the Federal Trade Commission, while a very important federal agency, it only has so much resources, and not to discount its importance. I emphasize it is it's an agency with very deep roots in antitrust, and obviously has taken big companies like Apple and Amazon to court in under the current chair's watch. Look, it's also looking to create a precedent with this rule. The question is, what's the extent, and what are the resources, um, and ultimately, I always think of a rule is only as good as the rule that is a reasonable rule, right? Because you need reasonable rules. You don't need egregious rules, and also the extent of its enforcement. Because rules that get enforced um, from time to time whenever someone just wants to enforce it is also not the right way to run agency, federal or state. I think that the idea is if you're looking to create the proper environment, then rules and laws have to be enforced, but laws they have to be rules reasonable. So we'll look to see what happens here. Well, this is the final slide. I appreciate everybody who joined us today, and we hope to see you at a future webinars. Now that it's fall, we're going to be doing them quite regularly. We have a pretty good schedule, a webinar scheduled every probably 2 weeks or so, with the exception of the holidays. And we hope to see you soon, and also at our upcoming event. And thank you, and we appreciate. And while there's no way to review us for this webinar, and we're not asking you to review any positive and negative, we hope to see you back again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.